Should I sign in here? Is that what this is
Yeah,
for?
that's being passed around.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, welcome to the Southeast Michigan Media Lab. I'm Michelle Rogers, I'm the director of the Media Lab. This is Charlie Crum, he's our presenter. He's a political reporter at the Oakland Press. And he'll be talking about Michigan politics and elections. And just a little background on the Media Lab. It is a free resource for the community where you can learn digital media and social media tools. We provide free workshops here. We also provide individual training if you'd like to come in. And if you want help on setting up a Facebook page, a Twitter account, or creating, let's say, a timeline, writing a news release, any of that, we provide free help here just by appointment. So again, welcome. Thanks, Charlie. Thank you.
Thanks, great to be here. I'm going to need one of these later. So I'm grabbing one. Michelle said, I'm Charlie Crum with the Oakland Press, and I have a little background about me. I've been with the Oakland Press about 24 years. A large part of it has been spent covering some form of election, government policy, sometimes with better results than others, honestly. It's not an easy thing to do sometimes. Today, what we want to talk about, what Michelle asked me to talk about, was trying to write fair and balanced stories. Obviously, there's a lot of polarization in our politics today, so we'll touch on some of that. Before we get started, a little bit, discuss a little bit about the political climate. Let's see, I thought I'd start with a little humor. Some of it's a little biting. Politics is professional wrestling for people with no athletic ability. I have no idea where I heard that one. That's always made me chuckle a little bit. The analogy being football season, I guess. And politicians in diapers should be changed frequently and for the same reason. And I'll come back to the humor part of it a little later. There's actually a serious point behind that. A little bit of background about politics, elections, and campaigns. Why we cover elections. Elections choose our policymakers. A lot of this is going to be obvious to all of you. And the policies adopted by the elected at all levels affect us, and political popularity is at an all-time low, generally speaking, which is probably the reason for some of the biting, humorous remarks that you see on bumper stickers or the ones that I opened with. Elections are big business. Nationally, the combined spending of Mitt Romney's campaign and Barack Obama's totaled $2.3 billion. I found that number astonishing when I came across it.
Do you have any idea who spent what part of that? Which
Yes.
side?
What do you mean? No, that's their combined spending.
Yeah, but
Their spending was almost dead even, total spending.
so even,
Actually, Barack Obama's direct contributions to his campaign were about somewhere in the 650 million range. Direct contributions to Mitt Romney's campaign were about 450 million. The state parties each contributed about 500 million to the campaigns, each political party organization. And then the so-called soft money groups, to add those in, that came to about another 500 million each.
Like George Soros?
Yeah, like that. Yep. If you add in the U.S. congressional races, that total figure jumped to 4.343 billion. That's nationally. And just in Michigan, spending on state offices that were on the ballot in Michigan, excluding all the federal offices, was 209 million, and there wasn't that much on the ballot last year. And the big year will be coming up. Again, I'm probably stating the obvious, but for all practical purposes, we have a two-party system. Republicans and Democrats, and I like to picture a tug of war with a football field. The ball moves back and forth and never quite reaches the goal line for anybody. And the goal of both parties is to elect more of their people than the other party in order to get policies and approaches that reflect their philosophies on issues. However, Republicans and Democrats do agree on some things. They agree that politics is a tough business. Barack Obama says that it's never been for the thin-skinned or the faint of heart. And Republican Bill Brooks Patterson, who is a frequent critic of Barack Obama, says politics is a bare-knuckle game, and he'd probably be appalled to discovered that he agrees with Obama on anything. Republicans and Democrats actually also agree on broader outcomes, I think. You ask anybody whether they believe in better schools, safer communities, climates where there's economic development and well-paying jobs, I think both sides would answer yes. What they differ on obviously is the approach and how to get there. And both of them will typically agree, generally speaking, they agree that about a third of Michigan voters are straight ticket Republicans. You go into the voting booth, you just pull the lever, you leave. A third are straight ticket Democrats, and a third are independent or ticket splitting voters. Just, the basic tools of campaigns, the internet, door to door. That's my own smart aleck take on, boy, I wish I bought that Great Dane. Knocking to your door. Mailings, events, fundraisers, robocalls, phone banks, volunteers. The internet in particular really wasn't that big of a campaign tool as much as 7 years ago in the 2006 election. If anybody had a web page out there, it was usually a high-dollar Senate campaign. It really wasn't an interactive web page like you see today. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter. These social media platforms that are used today didn't exist back then. So that's become an astronomical tool. It became one in the 2008 election when, frankly, Barack Obama's campaign unleashed this huge internet machine. And I think it took everybody by surprise. And since then, it's proven to be a fantastic way to raise funds for your campaign. Not just from within your district, if you're not running for a federal office, but you can raise money from all over the country very easily now. Today's tools of the trade, now we're going to get into my end of the business here. We're not just notebook and pencil guys anymore. It's not uncommon where you're going to see somebody showing up, for example, at a political event with notebooks, pens, cameras, iPhones, tripods, voice recorders, video recorders, whatever tools, and a laptop. And using all of them while you're at these various events. Typical coverage of a live event, you might write the lead of your story and post it to social media platform Twitter. You might upload a photo from your iPhone to whatever video platform your organization might be using, or to Facebook. You might be interviewing comments, seeking comments from the audience about what's going on in the event. You may have showed up with a lot of preloaded background on candidates or debates or whatever you're covering. And at the very end of it, you might write a new lead and a final story at the end, and then ship it all. Some helpful resources. I'm kind of a follow the money person. The Federal Elections Commission, you file your campaign finance statements, they go to the federal government. Michigan Secretary of State handles campaign finance statements for state candidates. The Internal Revenue Service down lower right, they actually keep track of the 527 groups, the soft money organizations. Michigan Campaign Finance Network is actually one of my favorite organizations. They actually plow through all the campaign finance data after an election and compile it and make it readily available to anybody. The Center for Responsive Politics does the same on a national level. And their name's obviously OpenSecrets.org. Your local clerk, if you want to find out what's on the ballot and so forth, that's the place to go. Precinct delegate lists I've found very useful from the standpoint of finding people of either party that are willing to speak aside from what the candidate may speak. And Facebook and Twitter, with landlines going away, in a lot of ways Facebook and Twitter I think are becoming the de facto white pages of the world, simply because we've now evolved to the point where if you're going to run for office, most people are going to throw up a Facebook page and have their friends, invite their friends and supporters to it. I think less so on Twitter. I think Twitter's use in campaigns at all levels hasn't quite reached the state Facebook has. And I think probably you might want to blame somebody like Anthony Weiner for that a few years ago. Let's see, types of election stories that we write about, there's all kinds. Filings, events, fundraisers, debates, polls, gaffes. Those may be pretty self-explanatory, but one gaffe that comes to mind is the Republican presidential debates that were held out at Oakland University, and Texas Governor Rick Perry was asked which 3 departments he'd cut, and he could only name 2, and that just blew up his campaign. Campaign finance reports, those are important to keep track of. We really don't write about them regularly, but one instance is coming up. Obviously, Senator Carl Levin is retiring in Michigan, and Gary Peters, who's a strong fundraiser, actively jumped into the race. On the Democrat side, Terry Lynn Land has jumped in, but she has not filed a campaign finance statement yet. So there's still speculation that more Republicans might jump into that U.S. Senate race on the Republican side, but they're waiting, I think, till the end of the month till the campaign finance reports come available to see what she's been able to do over the summer in terms of building a financial war chest. Republicans have been reluctant to give money to her. She may be perceived as not being a strong enough candidate to take on Peters within the Republican Party. You might see some of the Republicans jump in. Just an example. Obviously, candidate race profiles, advertising. A tremendous amount of money is spent on political advertising during the course of the campaign, which we're all aware of. And increasingly, obviously, at the end of the campaign, advertising really turns, last month, it really tends to turn negative. And that's largely goes back to the fact that there's a large number of voters out there who are not only independent but undecided, and they do not make up their minds until the last month of the campaign. And whether you agree with it or not, negative, and whether or not it's truthful, negative advertising has been shown that it works. So, ballot proposals, court challenges, election results, obviously, recounts after an election, candidacy of elections and recounts. Obviously, in the city of Detroit, the mayoral primary wound up between the board of canvassers, and that kind of flip-flopped back and forth. So, the unexpected, and occasionally, in my experience, occasionally candidates, for example, have died, which creates an entire new dynamic in the middle of an election. And probably one of the most obvious candidate statements. Candidates and office holders issue statements all the time, virtually daily. And from a media perspective, this is something that the Tampa Bay Times put together several years ago. It's politifact.com, and it's called their truth meter. And they, on a regular basis, take statements that are made by various people, either running for office or in office, and then they research whether or not these comments are true, and give them a rating: half true, mostly false, true, and of course the big false, liar, liar, pants on fire, the flames there. So, and that's something we as journalists should try to do a little bit more often, and we don't always do as well at that as we should, but these guys do exceptionally well.
Yeah, but all the people that you interview get 50 million different stories.
Yeah.
Oh, help.
Yeah. As, my advice to reporters, when I try to do myself, is understand the ballot. Somewhere in this little packet here is this little sheet with a lot of little tiny writing on it.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes actually out of the Oakland County Clerk's office. At least from a journalist standpoint, you have all the basics here to write a story. And on the left-hand side tells you what the political party is, tells you the candidates' names, address, emails, their phone numbers, tells you what office they're running for, the length of the term, and it tells you, in this case, it tells you using the top one as an example, tells you the Wixom mayor's race is a contested race. Down at the bottom, on the party designation key, it gives you a list of party abbreviations. In this case, these are municipal elections. The non-partisan nature of the elections does not mean that these people don't have political affiliation. In municipal elections, it simply means that declaring a political affiliation is not a requirement to run for the office. And then over on the right, one thing I always look at are whether or not people file petitions to run for office, or whether they pay a minimal fee to get on the ballot. Depending on local small city like Wixom, typically they'll file petitions, they'll go door to door, they'll get their supporters. As you get to larger and larger political districts, sometimes it's more expedient for people to simply pay the $100 or whatever it is to get on the ballot, rather than spend the time canvassing to get petitions and vetting to make sure those signatures are valid. Filing date, I also try and take a good look at that. If you take sometimes it's an indication of whether people sometimes are serious or not. Again, in the instance of the Wixom mayor, Kevin Hinckley jumped in early, and relatively later, he's got a challenger. In this case, I happen to know that Michael McDowell, I believe, was a former mayor in Wixom. One thing these, either the Oakland County, information from the Oakland County clerk or any other municipal body usually won't tell you is who the incumbents are. You can kind of dig that up yourself. Just some advice in terms of writing a story. Not every detail that I'm going to learn is going to make it into a story. If I don't know these details, I often won't be capable of telling an adequate story that somebody will understand. Always strive for accuracy, the big stuff, the small stuff. Actually, if you've done your homework, and there isn't an accuracy, it's usually made from haste, rather than for any other reason. I've occasionally been guilty of that. When you're checking names, always spell them back. Sometimes I ask twice just to make sure I've heard it properly, because we have a variety of ways to spell what sounds like a relatively common names, and we have a growing diverse community, and some names.
Yeah, with accents.
Beg pardon?
With accents.
Yes, some names are very difficult. Certainly I can't sound them out myself and get them right. So always ask. When you finish your story, read it at least once all the way through before you turn it in. And if you have the opportunity, have another set of eyes read it. For myself, just for punctuation and spelling, I actually like to read it backwards, so I don't get confused by the context, lost in the story itself, and then read it forward for context. In my opinion, a balanced election story should include, obviously, should name all the candidates in the race. It doesn't matter if the reason you're writing the story to begin with is focused on one candidate. You should always mention the other candidates on the ballot at the same time. You should know whether they're incumbents or challengers. You should note their party affiliations, because if applicable, that's important to people. You should note when the election will be held. I think just for context and background, candidates' age and hometown where they live is an important thing to have. And the description of the district. If you throw out there 11th Congressional District, a casual person might not know where that is. One example, basically stick to the basics: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And one example here, 14 months ago, Thaddeus McCotter quit Congress after he failed to get on the ballot. I'm just using this because it's a fairly well-known example, but pretty much the who, what, where, when, and why are all here. Bags quit Congress, had a failing file, and signatures to appear on the August 7th primary ballot. A little more background about McCotter, the guitar playing Colonial Republican, briefly was the president. Said why he quit. He said he resigned to focus on the investigation and the signatures that kept him off the ballot. I also try and add context. Why would this matter to me? Why would this matter to somebody in the district? What's the big picture overall? The fact of the matter is that McCotter's resignation concerned some Republicans. They were afraid that what had been a safe seat might not turn out to be a safe seat. And in a real broader context, at that time, Republicans wanted to keep control of the U.S. House, in part, to challenge the Affordable Care Act, and something they still want to do today. And then, of course, zoom back into the district. Who's going to who McCotter's departure leaves on the ballot, and what happens if that vote goes unchallenged, who we'll face in November. Some tips. Don't be rude. In my opinion, it takes an awful lot today to run for public office at any level. I think it always has, and especially the more local the race, you're more likely to be writing stories about people who are your friends, your neighbors, your acquaintances. There's really no point in being rude to them regardless of whether you like what they say or whether you don't. At the same time, don't be intimidated. I mean, if you're going to go through the effort of covering a story, you have every right to ask, question their positions. Don't blindly regurgitate anything from any candidate, office holder, or group. Basically, if somebody sends you out an email or a news release that says so-and-so candidate loves baby ducks, and you've done your homework and you realize that in their candidate background they listed that they're also a member of the NRA, who duck hunting every fall. There's something a little incongruous about. I think it would be helpful to mention the NRA affiliation if you're going to mention the baby ducks. And don't insert your own political biases. We all have them. I have my own, and I try to keep them out.
Mine is simple. I won't bite the hand that feeds me.
Some more tips. Only write about what you observe and know. Be prepared for the unexpected. Example of the unexpected, I think would be, one recent example would be former Congressman Weiner in New York going ballistic at one of the events. Somebody happened to catch that on video, it went viral, probably didn't help his campaign, but that's one of those unexpected things. Strive for balance is really what this is about. Be accurate. If you make a mistake, correct it. I've occasionally made some in haste. As long as I've been doing this, if I'm juggling more than one candidate, I will accidentally put an R after the name, but it's actually a D. And then, of course, I'll get the inevitable phone call. Charlie, we've known each other. We've been around for 20 years. Sorry, I apologize. It's haste. I'll correct it. So, get to know campaign staff. Oddly enough, some candidates win elections and they hang around for a long time. Some don't. Campaign workers, especially when you get up to the congressional level, they tend to hang around. Paid political workers tend to hang around a long time, and you will see them pop up at various campaigns. Get to know elections workers. In Oakland County, where I spend the vast majority of my time, the Oakland County Clerk's Office is invaluable, and the elections director has been most helpful, both in terms of context and in terms of history that I should probably know and may have forgotten. And he seems to have right at his steps.
I was election worker in Oakland County.
Big pardon?
I worked the elections in Oakland County.
Did you?
That's how I got into this.
What did you do in Oakland County?
Well, just the election inspector, and I think the first one was in Southfield. That was before Bush. It was in it was Clayton. But out of 3 precincts, we were at the Southfield High School. We had 3 precincts set up. Only 36 people showed up. Except when Bush came, they were lined up at 6 o'clock and we weren't even open yet.
Yeah.
All day long.
Well, even in Michigan, I think presidential turnout across the state is rarely tops 70%. And as you get to smaller elections without a big major election on the ballot, turnout gets down into the teens. So,
3 districts, only 36 people. Wow.
yeah, was that a city election or?
Yeah.
Develop a thick skin. The reason I say that is that, there are a number of, you really can't run a campaign anymore without having a core of extremely loyal volunteers, and they tend to support their candidates vociferously. I've written stories that I thought were fair and balanced, and still think are fair and balanced. I've had people call me up and say, you quoted this person, and there were 100 words in the quote, and you quoted his opponent, and there were 50 words in the quote. You're obviously biased because there are more words in this quote than in the other quote. So I don't know how to argue with that, simply say that some people tend to be a little bit
Just tell me
more...
run out of paper.
Right. Ran out of ink. Some people tend to be a little bit more wordy than others. So, however, you will get strong supporters calling you, so develop a thick skin. And along with that, keep a sense of humor. People who are involved in politics take their politics very seriously, and actually so do I. They do try and keep a sense of humor. The rule of 50% plus one. For politicians, smart politicians understand they can't please everybody and they don't try. They only know they need 50% plus one to win, and obviously anybody who's going to run for office would like a slightly bigger margin than that. And for journalists, likewise, stories you write or I write aren't going to please everybody, and in a close contested election, expect to have every word counted and challenged by both sides, and justifiably so. Don't lose sight of your audience if you're writing a story. There's the Bart and Lisa rule, which basically says your story should be clear enough for Bart to understand and informative enough that Lisa wants to read it. So, and that's the basics from my point of view. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody want to kick anything around?
You just do political election stuff?
No, I write about, well, in my time at the Oakland Press, I've written about, I actually cover people after they assume office. So I write about the state legislature, I write a little bit about Congress. For quite a number of years, I wrote about the Oakland County Board of Commissioners, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Just because it's such a uniquely structured political body, I think. I've covered municipal.
If you know what you're talking about.
Well, it's a unicameral,
Yeah,
one
well,
body chamber.
you're in the business, but I have some neighbors and you mention one thing and they just don't even register, so.
So I've also covered school board elections, city council elections, and they all have different characteristics and flavors that make them unique. But, yeah.
Well, I'm not a reporter. I'm here to get some notes and things for
Sure.
a young high school senior who is a budding journalist. And when I found out about this, I'm from Troy, so it's kind of a long haul here.
Hi, man.
Yeah, I called him up and said, "You ever heard of this Charlie guy?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, "What do you think of him? Is it worth me going over there tomorrow?" I said, "Well, he's one of the better ones." So.
Tell him I said thanks.
Okay.
Maybe you could explain how people can get like campaign finance information, when that's released, and how you can access it, and what you can do with that information.
All right. Back up a little bit here. Let's see. Now again, you want people running for federal office, U.S. Senate, and Congress, go to Federal Elections Commission. If you want statewide candidate information, go to Michigan Secretary of State. You can go to your local clerk if you want county candidate financial information. Oakland County keeps its own, as long as it's within the county borders, they'll keep their campaign finance reports there. If you want to try and track 527 groups, at least their filings, the IRS is the place to go. And if you simply want to, it'll be after the fact, but if you want to do after the fact research, Michigan Campaign Finance Network and the Center for Responsive Politics do an absolutely good job of culling from all these other sites to get a good financial picture of how the money is spent, where it's coming from, who's doing the donating.
Do you have any examples of maybe you doing that research and producing a story out of it, like maybe something controversial happened, they spent the money the wrong way, anything like that?
In terms of spending the money the wrong way?
Like they broke rules, maybe, or they didn't file in time. How can they kind of get in trouble with, like, why are we tracking their finances? Why is that important?
Well, to my mind, tracking the finances, you can't, money is kind of the fuel that wins elections. And so I tend to track it more from seeing who's got, in a general sense, who's got more money than the other person.
Mm.
And if they're reasonably close, I tend to believe that it's probably going to be a pretty good race at a certain level. If, on the other hand, one person is showing that they've been able to raise $400,000 in X amount of time, and you're seeing its challenge of zero, it's probably not going to be a race worth covering or watching. So, if you're talking about things like missing filing deadlines, there are strategic reasons why campaigns miss filing deadlines. Primary one is they don't want the other person to know. There are sometimes they don't want the opposing side to know how much money they have or the resources or where it's coming from. And it's better to risk a fine or a slap on the wrist than to give up that in a strategic
So you
sense.
have to publish that before you even sign up?
Beg your pardon?
Do you have to publish your finances even before you register?
No, you have to file a statement of organization, campaign finance papers. For Congress, I believe the filings are quarterly. And there's one coming up at the end of the month, which is why I kind of raised earlier the point about whether or not the former Secretary of State, Terry Lynn Lamb, will have an opponent or not. Will largely, I think, depend on how strong her financing is.
But isn't she still in office?
No, she's been out of
okay,
office.
that's the other one, yeah.
She's been out of office. Yes.
Now, that part I never understood, that they could be in office and run again, instead of being in Congress doing their job, while they're out there, using our finances to be reelected. They should be laid off for 6 months and then you can go.
You mean that they're running for another office while they're holding?
Right, and then using their time to do that.
You're senator and you run for president. Well, wait a minute. Don't get paid. Well, remember Sonny Bono, when he passed away, his wife took over?
Mhm.
How does that work?
I believe that goes
Because,
back
if my
to,
husband dies, I don't get to go with his job.
I think she was appointed or something, wasn't she?
either that or they had a special election.
Yeah,
I don't recall exactly what that was. It's,
yeah, because it's like, still in the back of
I
my
recall when he
mind.
died, I recall that she took a seat over, but I don't recall if that was a special election or an appointment. I believe senatorial,
Pardon me?
It's common for wives to take over if their husband's dying in office.
it's a kind of sympathy thing, perhaps.
You went to any, oh, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna go launch off to another topic if you're done.
Yeah, I'm done with this one.
I'm Dr. Z, Richard Ziley, member of the State Board of Education. And the most seductive reporters are those who give me the impression that they're anxious to let me tell my story. And And then, of course, when the story comes out and I feel that they did something, I didn't make myself clear or they deliberately distorted what I've said, then then I have exactly the opposite reaction, distrust to the individual. But I think it is a real balancing act that the reporter has to do to because in that sense you are a servant to the public and to the candidates to help get the statements out there, to gather relevant facts and so on and so forth. And if I see my story in its paragraph, accurate, then I feel real good about the press and especially the individual I've talked to. And a lot of that is very subjective. I mean, a guy can do the same job and do the same thing on paper, but if in our personal interactions, it's, I'm telling the story and I don't want to hear what you got to, I don't want to hear your expert background information, then I feel like I've been cut off and I'm just being used by the individual who's writing the story.
You mean video versus print? Is that what you mean?
Either. I think it applies in both cases. I was thinking primarily of print, but video, yeah, because then you are prone to waste people's time on camera, which is.
Personally, I think both mediums are challenging when it comes to telling a story because newspapers haven't gotten any larger, the news hole's really small, and it's really, really hard to cram a lot into.
Especially on TV, you get 1 second.
Right, into a few paragraphs, and likewise with video, when you're limited to 30-second spots.
Or just the weathermen. Just the weathermen, they have this $1 million equipment to tell us about Colorado, the flood. Wait a minute, don't we have a camera over here that we could see it? Instead, just tell me about it. I want to be on the radio, but tell me about it. But I have television, and then, or even if they interview somebody, they ask them one question, and if that person doesn't answer right back, they just cut them off and, next question. Wait a minute.
Do you do much video yourself?
Yeah, for the last 4 or 5 years, as we've developed our presence online, I shoot a lot of video now. Because I deal mostly with politics and people running for office or holding office, typically they're more one-on-one conversations. I don't have a lot of background shots or voiceover type videos, so it's more typically just a back and forth interview.
Do you ordinarily edit that rather than just put it out there?
Well, to some degree you have to edit it because, for example, if I go over, if I get an interview, for example, with County Executive Brooks Patterson, if I'm going to take the time and drive over there, I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 different things. I'm not going to talk about just one topic. So I will wind up with a big long clip that I'll splice into, and then I'll probably edit out some of the stumbling ums and ahs, my own, and his credit, he really doesn't use many ums or ahs.
Do you ever start trouble?
Beg
Do you ever start trouble?
your pardon?
Do you ever start trouble?
Do I ever start trouble?
Well,
It depends what you mean by trouble.
on Sunday's Detroit paper, they showed where different cities with the property taxes is in different cities. And Bloomfield Hills was basically almost the lowest one. Now, my thing is, when I lived in Bloomfield Hills, I could connect my internet to the library and it was free. Now I'm living here and property taxes is quite high, but I can't get free internet. But we have this fellow around town that advertises wireless HD, free internet available. And I can't get anybody to answer me.
That is the fellow's advertisement?
Yeah, Steve Pierce is the fellow's name.
There's no contact information there at all?
Oh, this Well, he won't talk to me anymore, let's put it that way. Because, I went to City Hall and, he complained that all I want is for free. I said, well, that's what it says.
So when you ask me if I start trouble, you're asking me if we,
Why not?
If you'll take on that story.
if we investigate these types of
Yeah,
things,
but
sometimes, yeah.
now when I lived at, Bloomfield Hills, matter of fact, next to the library, we got free internet. All I had to do is put in my password and that, and I was all set.
Mhm.
Yeah, and here we advertise free, Liberty Wireless.
Well, now, that looks like maybe a picture that they would put in the window of a business that's
Well, they
signed up with, him, and they're paying for it, but it's,
Well, he was up and down all Ypsilanti, what, 3 years ago, I think you started that? With the little radio receiver in, and I think next door to tap room, they still have one.
That's
Matter
like
of fact,
wireless obsession.
Yeah, they have one even in the park.
but isn't that just to attract customers into that business that's paying for
It's
it?
still free.
Well,
Yeah, it's like
you
I'm
can, if you go
accessing,
there and use it, you can use it for free, right?
yeah,
Well,
That's
I
what
can
they're
go to
saying.
my apartment and get it for free.
Because you
Why
haven't
not?
signed up for the paid portion of it.
No, that's not the way you explained it.
No, it doesn't say free any place you go. I think you're chasing it.
No,
Well, I think this is a classic case of misunderstanding. And where you see the sign, you've got the free internet, but where you don't see the sign, you know,
Yeah.
and
I checked with the businesses, they don't pay for it.
okay.
Because for him to get the signal, he has to put that little radio all over, so he gets his signal. So I'm willing to put the little radio in my apartment, it gets the signal. Matter of fact, we're up on the hill, he would get a very good signal.
Charlie, can you give us any other sort of maybe tricks of the trade of getting, when you're covering politics, getting people to talk maybe more easily? Or do you find that they want to share information and you don't have to drag it out of them?
By and large, I think if you're gonna run for office, you typically want to talk to media and to the public in general and get your message out, because that's really the goal, is to persuade voters to check the box next to your name as opposed to somebody else's. So you don't really see too many bashful people in politics. I've never seen any.
This isn't actually politics, but the other night, are you familiar with Brigitte Gabriel? She started an organization called Act for America, and she's widely known across the country as an expert on terrorism,
Okay.
and she's an anti-terrorism thing. She spoke at the Romeo Area Tea Party the other night, and I was trying to get permission for this young high school student to do an interview with her. He's done a lot of different interviews, but she just she didn't want anything from anybody. How do you get to be,
She didn't want to talk to anybody.
really? She had a book signing afterwards, and she was mostly interested in selling her books.
And I'd say at the local level, when I ran Heritage Media in these small towns, also there'd be candidates who wouldn't talk to the media either because they were afraid maybe their message would be manipulated, or they felt like they had enough ground support that they didn't need the media and they were going to shun you. Have you ever run into that? And how do you deal with that?
I don't think I've ever run into anybody who's not been willing to talk to me because they didn't trust my ability to get the story out. What I have run into, for example, are people who have run what they call whisper campaigns, and they don't want the media attention on their campaign. They're quietly going, building their support, basically under the media radar, while perhaps the other candidate is out in front of the media all the time. And
See, as a journalist, I'd find that suspicious. Like, what does that candidate have to hide that they don't want to talk to me or have me, like, yeah.
yeah, but I think that's just another strategy, really. It can be. Or they may simply not like you. They don't want to talk to you.
How do you handle when you get a lot of calls about I think you should check into this candidate. They have some secrets, that kind of thing. I'm sure you get that a lot. Politics can get pretty nasty. Do you go chasing all of that, or are you looking for more concrete information before you pursue something?
Well, it depends on the validity of the information. If it's just a tip, candidate so-and-so beats his dog, there's really not much I can do about that. Maybe check with local police if you have time to see if some animal cruelty report or something. But, there are times when I've gotten stacks of paper anonymously about a candidate, and that stack of paper included all the homework for me, the police reports and stuff like that. And it's like, I did not know that. And, that occurs too.
Investigative reporters, do they, for the most part, set their own schedule and go after the things they're interested in, or do they get assignments all most of the time? Or?
I'd say a combination of both. Editors who have been around a long time, they might say, yeah, this is worth looking into. Hey, Charlie, let's look into this. Or if I'm out and about and I come up with an idea that I want to pursue, I'll say, yeah, I'd like to pursue this. Okay, go ahead. So it's a little of both. Yep.
Bias is a big deal in the media, with critics on both sides saying that, this is bias, that's bias. And there's been stories where people of a certain party, some publications won't mention that party if it's a negative story, but if it's the opposite party, that's the first thing they get. In your experience, how do you handle charges of bias, and just reiterate, what's the best way to avoid, being accused of being biased?
Well, I think the best way to avoid being biased is to be fair to both sides. And all of these things help. Regardless of whatever the context of the story is, including these elements in your story will actually help reduce accusations of bias. Reduce, not eliminate. Somebody is always going to feel that whatever you've written about, or how you put your video together, or edited your audio clips, perhaps wasn't fair. Well, you mentioned this person first, and this person second, therefore you're biased towards the first person. All you can do is just be as fair as you can and understand that the critics are going to be out there and they're justified to criticize. With critics, when people have legitimate criticism, as long as they're not swearing at me or threatening to sue me, which people have done, as long as their criticisms are legitimate, I'd like to know what they are. It's possible that maybe I did short one side over the other. So I'd like to know about it.
Do you have insurance for that?
Insurance?
Yeah,
Well, I think we have.
It's unlikely, so.
I'm pretty sure a corporation has liability insurance
Yeah,
for things like libel and slander.
because nowadays everything has an insurance, so.
I guess they're trying to pass some laws now that limits people's access and defining what a journalist is and who isn't a journalist. What do you think about all that stuff?
You can't have a whole idea behind journalism in general is to keep an eye on government. So therefore, you really can't have government deciding who is or who isn't a journalist. So I really, from that standpoint, I don't agree with what they're doing.
Okay, what's the difference between a journalist and a reporter?
Nothing. Do the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Well, journalist could be a broader concept to include editors
Yeah.
and stuff like that. People
Just a
don't-
guy that's been on the job longer, right?
No, somebody who may not be actually writing the story, somebody who's reading it, can be also be called a journalist. Just a broader term.
How about, isn't there a law that allows journalists to protect their sources? They don't have to say who they were?
Yes.
Uh,
Well,
does-
there's some shield laws in some states.
Does that
Still
apply to
on the
anybody who, isn't officially a paid journalist? If a blogger or something finds something out and puts it out there, and people wanna know where he got that, is he able to shield his sources?
My personal opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but my personal opinion is yes. As long as there's public good behind what they're doing. And frankly, I think most people who have blogs up and have had them up for any length of time, sell some sort of advertising to support those blogs. So that, in my mind, makes them a paid journalist, just like anybody else. They're, in fact, they're self-employed, chief cook and bottle washers are relevant.
Do
Yes,
you
ma'am.
do any stories in Oakland County on fracking?
Fracking? Yes,
Because it's-
I personally have not, but we've had some people on our staff that have been following that, in particular in Waterford, and I believe the County Water Resources Commissioner Jim Nash is.
At the library, they have a BBD called WIEB, W-I-E-B, War. It's about a guy and his family up in Canada. And for 5 years, they kind of ignored the fracking, but then they had miscarriages and diseases in the family. But the only word that's missing out of the whole movie is fracking. But it tells the story when all companies come in and dig in that, so that's a very interesting DVD for everybody to see. Especially now that we're getting fracking all over or something, so. Because they have over 200 chemicals going to the groundwater, plus they use our sweet water from the lakes of Michigan. And sooner or later, we're gonna run out of stuff that's free of things that hurt us. But
Well, fracking, without a doubt, is getting
as a
more
matter
and
of
more
fact, we
attention.
have petition at the farmer's market where you can sign the petitions, so we might get into that.
Is context important or the history? Because like the issue the lady here just brought up, fracking. From my understanding, fracking's been going on in America for quite a long time. It's just become the big issue in the last couple of years. In politics, should a candidate's record is that pertinent in explaining things?
I think it is. If you're doing candidate profiles in advance of an election, you're comparing the two candidates, yeah, I think their records are both fair game and probably necessary, if you to the degree that you have them, of course. Yeah, I think the records are important. I certainly don't hold it against anybody who has never held a public office before. Sometimes that might be the better option.
Would you have to go back and see if they wrote a letter to the editor about certain stances or comments they've made in the past? Would that be to be fair, if they're going in somebody's record, if somebody's got a record of making statements online and things like that, would that be legitimate to go after to see what kind of statements, find their Facebook page and go through their statements?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Facebook is frankly, it's public, it's really a public medium.
Yeah, but you can hang yourself too.
And if you're gonna throw up your activities as a candidate and put statements on your page that are related to the office you're running for, they're just as fair game as if you sat in this room and told them to you or told them to me.
You all know that Google reads everybody's email and
That's the NSA.
Well, Google is reading something there, because the other day I did a Google search I got printer problems on my computer. I looked for a printer, and ever since then I've been getting these little emails, or not, some of them were emails and some were little advertisements. Hey, looking for a printer? And a couple of years ago, I bought at a garage sale, I bought a portable outhouse. It was a deal, okay? And
You find anything in the garage.
it was in with a whole bunch of other stuff, take the whole bunch. I'm trying to end this garage sale, but I thought I'd give it to my next door neighbor who was an Eagle Scout, and they could use it for their camping. But just out of curiosity, I went and did a search to see how much those things cost. And every once in a while, I still get an ad for, something like that.
Well, so, yeah, it sounds like you might want to clear your search history out of your the other.
Well, I think they've got it at Google somewhere, you know.
There's a school out in California that pays AT&T to read the emails from all the students in their school. So it's like, I guess, we're all under the light.
To some degree, it's become a smaller world.
Yeah.
So in anticipation of this November election, maybe you could,
This November election or
Not
this
this
following?
well, I mean, well, the following one's the big one. So maybe you could speak on either one and what you anticipate coming across or.
Well, this year is this is an odd election year, meaning not that meaning that it's not an odd year, it's an odd number year. So odd number, they're all election years are odd. This year's elections are largely city municipal elections, city councils and so forth. And I think probably, at least in Michigan, what happens in the Detroit mayoral race will probably overshadow most of the municipal elections around the state. Next year we have Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, all 148 state reps, state senators, all our members of Congress, some Supreme Court justices, all township offices across the state. So it's going to be a real jam-packed ballot in 2014, and larger the ballot, the more confusing it can tend to be. I don't know if that answers your question or not, Michelle. Partially.
Would you comment on, like, say, after the basic tools, let's see, writing your story there, you come up with your lead. Unpack that for us. What are some ways in which you decide? And the lead is the storyline with a significance.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the lead is the very first paragraph that sums up what you're going to be telling a story about.
Okay.
This is pretty much follows the old Associated Press rule of the inverted pyramid, and who, what, where, when, why, and how are the elements to the inverted pyramid. The who in this case is Thaddeus McCotter. The what is abruptly quit Congress. The when is Friday, and a partial why is after filing failed enough signatures to appear on the August ballot. Then I expand on the why a little bit later, and then get into let's see, get into some of the what it means. And the one thing that's missing in these first few paragraphs that I threw up here is basically a how. How did McCotter resign? Did he throw a paper airplane out the window? Did he email the Speaker of the House?
This was a fairly clear, I mean, the congressman resigned, so your lead is fairly clear there. But now, your example on the Wixom election, how will you recognize a lead?
Well, let's see, if it's a campaign filing story, I would tell you that I would probably say two people are on the November ballot to run for mayor of Wixom. That would be my lead.
Okay.
And then I would go from there. Kevin W. Hinckley will run against Michael McDonald. And I just keep developing the story as it goes.
So any tips for new reporters or maybe someone who's just starting a political blog on covering the 2014 election and the candidates?
I'm sorry, which election?
The next year.
Next election?
Yeah. Seems like a lot of information to go through and profiles to write and.
Well, yeah, I'd contact if they're new, I would make sure I contact the candidates, and I would actually send them questions that they can answer that are uniform, that will give them the background they can to write the stories. You know, their ages, their hometown, their political experience, their occupations.
So Q&A. Do you normally just do like a copy and paste of a Q&A, like directly, or do you turn it into a story using the information they provided?
We've done both. It really depends on how many, really depends on the size of the ballot. Sometimes it's easier just to take the information they supply and just reduce it into kind of a box under their picture than to write a full-blown story. And it's actually more of a quick reference for basic information, I think sometimes in the story is.
Do you ever interview the candidates' wives before the election?
Rarely. I think the last one I did was, last one I interviewed was Mitt Romney's wife when she was at the Franklin Cider Mill.
Oh, okay.
And that was very brief.
Because of her or because of you?
Because of the large amount of Secret Service people, the large crowd in general.
But you couldn't
It
get.
It really wasn't a one-on-one anyway. It was just looking to get a question in. So,
But isn't Debbie Dingell running for her husband's seat?
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet,
I think he still got something to say.
But she's, I think, been running for a couple of years now, just not saying that she's it.
I don't know.
I think they're,
Cannot speak for
they're
Debbie.
grooming her.
No, and he's getting younger every day.
Hmm.
It'll be a long time waiting.
What are some common missteps when you're covering politics that, you gave us a list, but in your experience, what are the warning signs if you're writing a story that, you know, it's like, and you're tempted to go down a trail, it's like, you know, maybe step back and like think about what you're gonna write about.
Personally, my personal opinion is if you answer these questions, you probably won't go wrong.
Yeah.
Missteps, I think, occur when, well, first of all, if you're starting to write your story, and you get down far enough, and you suddenly realize that where the story's heading has nothing to do with where you started, then you probably need to start over. Because you probably grabbed something out of the middle and made it the start of the story, or maybe you've injected your own personal biases into it. You shouldn't. So that's,
How do you get creative, but still, you know, I mean, you don't wanna get, sometimes, you know, overflowing about somebody, and that's what bias, you think, you know, the Messiah has come to us in the form of this candidate, but you still wanna be creative and, you know, capturing the moment or capturing the flavor of the candidate.
well, actually, back in 2008, I think it probably would have been fair to lead a story with, a candidate with the qualities of the Messiah has come to Troy. Back when Barack Obama, the star quality he had and was just incredible. His campaign was really, obviously some of the luster's a little off the star now, but at the time when he was first running, I think it would have been real appropriate to make those kind of comparisons in your lead.
Can you think of anything in particular that has come back and back to bite a reporter in the butt for something he said or did?
Let's see. Well, except for inaccuracies that occur out of not double checking your facts, those will always come back and bite you in the butt. If you spell somebody's name wrong by mistake, that is remarkably offensive to people, and if I were running for office, I would be offended too. If you scramble numbers, you're messing with campaign finance numbers, and you have one of those dyslexic moments and transpose a number, that can change the entire meaning of a story. And these are just very, very small things, but they have very large impacts. So, yeah.
What are your, those who pay the piper call the tune, what are your publishers looking for from you? And I know in part that depends on what readers are looking for from you. How would you sum that up?
Well, I think what my experience at the Open Press is that we do not have much of a political bias. We really have strived over the years to be fair to both sides, as fair as possible. One of the questions related to that I'm most often asked, regards endorsements. Am I ever pressured for endorsements to write my story based on, slant my stories based on how the editorial board might endorse a candidate? And the answer to that is no. I have in fact sat in on endorsements and been part of making endorsements before, but once I do that, I no longer write about that race. That goes to somebody else. So we try and keep that fine line between the endorsement side of it and the objective, balanced reporting of a race.
Anybody ever steal your story?
I don't know what you mean by steal it.
Oh, sometimes they copy it, your information, they put their name on it.
No, I don't think I've ever, to my knowledge, I've not had that happen.
I've heard that a reporter has very little control over the actual headline that appears on his story. And sometimes people put a headline on there that doesn't even really relate to what that reporter's.
Yeah, that's a systems problem, and that is pretty much, has been pretty much true over the years at the Open Press, that somebody else writes the headline. Now that we're doing more and more online first and print later, it's more likely that I will write my own headline and put it in and upload it to the web with the story. However, if somebody wants to change it later, there's an editor or somebody else on the copy desk, they're certainly free to do so. They occasionally have. But yeah, that's back when we were definitely in print. That's always been a problem, something of a problem with people writing headlines without actually perhaps reading the entire body of the story.
Pretty irritating, right?
This is irritating for us too. Because,
That's what I mean, yeah.
yeah, because right under the headline is my name, and I'm the one who gets the phone calls the next day. What the hell's
You ever go overseas with some of the candidates or senators and write stories coming back? Outside or into China and
No,
took you along? No?
no, we don't have the size of the staff to do that kind of thing anymore. The Open Press doesn't anyway.
Yeah.
In the past, I did. I think one of Oakland County's first trade missions to Mexico, I went along on that one myself and some of the other Detroit area media.
And
That
the
was some
Olympics
20 years
coming
ago.
up too.
Beg your pardon?
The Olympics?
Well, I'm not a sports writer, so I'm
Yeah.
going to be going to the Olympics anyway.
Well, maybe the president go over there to take you along. No, but this would be an interesting story because between the gay and lesbians not being allowed into Russia or go to the Olympics, so that should be quite a story coming up.
Well, I personally think there's good stories everywhere.
Yeah, well, and Russia's a little different. That's why, did Snowden ever come out of Russia yet?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, because I haven't read about it in about 2 weeks, so.
Maybe getting settled in.
Have you ever thought one of your stories impacted or influenced the outcome of an election?
That's hard to say. I have no objective criteria whether any story influences the outcome of an election.
I guess, did you ever get like information on a candidate really close to an election and run with it, and the other guy ended up winning?
No, I have not. In all honesty, I've not had that occur yet.
Because I know, like, I think it was in 2000, right before the election, there was some story about Bush that came out. You know, it didn't impact the election, but it's just like, it looked like somebody planted a story like 2 or 3 days before the election about something he had done 10, 20 years ago.
Well, that's
It was 2 years where he was a flyboy and they couldn't find him.
right. That's kind of like, you're kind of talking about almost the same thing that happened with Mitt Romney in the video from a year and a half, making a 27% comment suddenly surfacing, late, relatively late
Oh,
in the
that's-
election.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Well,
That kind of
yeah,
thing, or?
well, I guess they happened in two elections, first there was like some drunk driving incident that happened way back in Bush's past, and that came out right before the 2000 election. And then during the 2004 election, Dan Rather came out with his, National Guard story. But, stuff like that comes up, it's like, I got this juicy stuff about this one candidate, and I didn't know if you've ever gotten like last minute information that would be,
No, they never.
condemning really would hurt, damaging to one candidate over another.
No, I don't believe I ever have. However, I would not hesitate, if I could verify the information is true, I wouldn't hesitate to use it either. The only question I would have is, I would like to make sure that clear the source of the information, first of all, and the fact, and I would question the timing of its release. In any story I wrote, simply because I think people do unleash the dogs towards the
Well, on the
end of the
internet, they
election.
did have some papers where his captain read something with the locked out a lot of this stuff, so, that's politics. Oh, interesting story, 9/11. The two buildings came down
Mhm.
at 5 o'clock, just the street over, the buildings on the Deutsche Bank came down. And no airplane hit it. And if you go on the Yahoo, you can get more details and pictures, but the American press really didn't even get into that part. It's just at 9:45 over here and the other one at 5 o'clock. And now they're rebuilding the building on Deutsche Bank, only at one floor, nothing higher than that. It'd be interesting to find out the real story behind all that too. And there's a lot of stuff going on the internet about suspicion of this part and this part and all that.
The internet definitely is a place
It's
for
politics.
lots of rumors.
Do you report for any paper or anything?
No, I'll just report to my neighbors when No, I live with a bunch of old people, 170 of them. Keep them up to date, and I find something, hey, we can't make money over here, we can't do this, we can't do this, but thanks to Snyder, he cut us off. So, put into that.
What kind of thing were you going to do that you make money? Well, this is
No,
getting out.
That's
no,
fine.
you can get home heating credit.
Oh,
Well, the last couple of years, well, it was nice anywhere from $100 to $500 back, but when Snyder came in, now it's $2 and $6, and my neighbors look at me like, just forget it, Or the rent refund. If you rent in the state of Michigan, you get 20% of your rent back, except Snyder cut it out. Last year was the last year.
Tell me a little bit about the area of political reporting. Sometimes I get the impression it's a little bit like acting. There are a lot of actors who supplement their income with it, or they do it for the love. They may supplement their income. There's comparatively few that make a living full time by it, and there are many jobs in, like I've been in a number of political staffers or folks that are, they're due for a couple of years and to tide them over through grad school or something like that, but you can't make a career of it. Would you comment on this line of work as a career versus just a labor of love that you do on the side or whatever?
Well, I wouldn't call it, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a labor of love entirely, because there are times when it's really irritating.
Yeah.
No matter how good humor they try to be. It's part of, how we've decided that we're going to cover the news, is to include politics and government, and my background goes back pretty far in that. I suppose probably I'm doing it today because I started working on campaigns when I was in my late teens.
Okay.
And they even went to at one point to a campaign school, which I will not say for which party because I'm an avowed ticket splitter these days, so, which means I'm part of the great unwashed.
I think there are some examples of people who have made a career out of it, you know, like Jay Carney. Okay, he used to be a reporter for some magazine or something, right? And he rides Obama's coattails into being
Yeah.
press secretary. George Stephanopoulos has done okay. I think it depends on whose coattails you can grab onto, and they take you along.
Well, you mean talking about a career as a political journalist or a career in politics, working?
Well, I was thinking of a political journalist who wants to go further than just being a political journalist.
Well, actually, Stephanopoulos went the other way. He
Yeah.
started off, he became a journalist after he left the White House.
Wasn't he press secretary or not?
Well,
For Obama?
Clinton.
Or Clinton, I'm sorry, yeah, Clinton.
And then he became what he is today after he left the
Well,
White
the
House.
president only got a 4-year term, so you're gonna be out after 4 years.
Right.
Most time you have to get reelected, they don't want to keep the chief of staff to get new people.
Well, and I guess that's part of what I'm fishing for, you know, and it's helpful to me to know that your original area of interest was politics, and then you kind of got into journaling, as opposed to someone who went to went to school to be a journalist and then ended up, in this as opposed to sports writing or whatever.
Well, actually, I started out as a sports writer, so.
Oh, okay, all right.
I just happen to have politics in my background at a relatively young age. So,
But
but I did start out as a sports journalist first.
well, a lot of kids or students go to school, the first year they want to be this one, second year, well, I don't want this until they switch, until after 4 years, they still don't know what they want to do, but just keep switching. And then something opens up and, so go from there.
Run out of money.
How much, I mean, you want to be fair and balanced, but for lack of a better phrase, the independent and the third party candidates, I mean, how do you approach them in the context of the general election when they've got, the two big parties and then there's these third party candidates? I mean, do you try to give them as much time and space as you give the major party candidates, or how do you judge that?
I think you have to judge that on a case-by-case basis. I mean, simple fact of the matter is, while we have third parties that appear on the ballot, National Law Party, these are all libertarians. These are all parties that appear on the ballot because they got a certain percentage of the vote 4 years ago in the Secretary of State's election. And that's what qualifies them to appear on the ballot. I think sometimes you really have to take a good hard look at, like anybody else, why they're running. I think you should contact them. There are some years where we've aggressively included them in our coverage, and there are a lot of years where we haven't. In all honesty, the last probably 4 or 5 years, the so-called minor political parties haven't been all that active. I think the Tea Party has kind of upstaged the Libertarians, and they're working through the Republican Party. I think the Green Party has been kind of absorbed into the Democratic base to some degree. So I don't think you're seeing the third party, growth or kind of noise that you used to see. I think a couple of years ago, I can think of a couple of, one congressional election in particular, which I believe, I'm trying to think when that was. Might have been 08.
Johnson?
No, it was when Gary Peters ran against Marty Goldberg. I think at that point, that turned into a wacky election because you had Jack Kevorkian, I think, jumped in as an independent at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then you had a Green Party candidate suddenly enter the race, as well as a Libertarian candidate suddenly entering the race. And aside from Kevorkian, that just kind of makes my antennas go up because you kind of wonder whether or not somebody has recruited these people to actually jump into the race in order to dilute votes from the other side in the event that it's a close race. So, and that's stuff I worry about when it comes to third-party candidates.
Do you ever find yourself doing an interview with some candidate and you know that he's full of crap? But you don't feel like you can express that in your story, but you don't want him to get elected, because some people are gonna believe this stuff?
Well, actually, if you're sitting across from somebody and they're, you know they're full of crap, I think you have an obligation, especially if it's a video interview, you have an obligation to say, hey, wait a minute, what about this? I think that's perfectly,
Actually, you
I think
should
you have a
always
responsibility
publish
to
it,
do
so
that.
But then, so many people would say that you're biased, okay? There are people who love this guy.
Well, questioning somebody, if somebody's saying something you know is blatantly absurd or false, then I don't think you can actually be labeled as biased for calling them on it. You know, I just don't think that.
Okay.
You might do a story about the bees,
What?
about the bees that are dying, or we won't have any food pretty soon.
No, not lately.
No, not lately, okay. Just checking.
I'll tell you one thing, you get back to what you were saying, one thing, somewhere in the list of stuff,
Yeah.
I think I suggested that people understand the major party, what their platforms are, what their platform issues are. One of the things I've noticed is that when you interview candidates, you can kind of tell which ones are thinking for themselves and which ones did a great deal of memorization. If you ask them, well, what's the major issues you see in the campaign, or what are your major positions? And all of a sudden, they're looking over the top of their head, or their eyes just glaze over, and they start, and they start saying, "I'm for accountability and whatever."
Yeah.
Well, maybe
Repeat some buzzwords.
next time you have the candidate tell me, here's the sunglasses.
So when they start doing that, then it's kind of like
Yeah.
push them a little harder, a little more specifics.
All right, any more questions?
Great.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, I enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too.
And if you follow the Media Lab on meetup.com, they will automatically notify you every time we set up a new workshop here. We usually have 2 or 3 a month, and they're all free.
I got it off the window out there, so.
Oh, okay.
I said, oh, it's not fair. I said, oh, like that. It's on media.com.
Meetup, meetup.com, and then look for the Southeast Michigan Media Lab.
Oh, no. State Board, I have one question.
Certainly, Maggie. Thank you.
In Egypt, the 7-year-old learns 3 languages at school.
I'll be
So
happy
how
to
many
write
languages
my
do
contact
we teach in
information
school?
out for you.
Tweeting in English, sometimes not even English.
Yeah, but how can our kids exist?
Thank you. Okay. So your question is,
We should teach our children different languages when they're little, because if the child learns it before the age of 12, he can't speak it, there's no reason.
yeah, sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Yep, well, I had it in the 4th grade, I had a choice of taking English, and I went home and asked my grandfather, he's saying I should take English, he says, no, you're never gonna need it. And I'm the kind of person, well, that's only 3 hours, and it wouldn't make any difference when I walked out. So I listened to my own tuition,
Sure.
and I had 4 years of English before I came over here. You know, because you never know what happens in the future.
What's he wants?
Where are you from, if I may ask?
Well, Germany, Lübeck, up in another part.
Yeah. My ancestors from Memmingen, looking at, Schwabenland.
I know this name, so can you help me about it?
Well, the other thing
He's
is
the one who's
my,
trying to
since your education,
sort
my
of high school and.
one daughter-in-law, raised
Oh,
the kids in
Cole
homes.
County, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually already passed his name on to Chancellor.
The 3 of them at age 16 just started college. Well, one granddaughter, she just got the opportunity to Italy to study for 10
Okay,
minutes.
well,
And are you Catholic?
kind of.
Lutheran.
Lutheran, Catholic,
I think they got moved out of the area.
no, she's on the island of Sardinia,
Yes.
and it's the first time in history that folks will come and visit the
Yes,
island.
yes.
And the family that she lives with, the mother is